This is Valley News Live at 6.
Good evening, everyone. We begin with breaking news out of Becker County, where a man, woman, and their 2 dogs were found dead in a home yesterday. The couple has just been identified as a husband and wife, 45-year-old Stephen Stearns and 49-year-old Stacy Stearns.
Now, the Ramsey County Medical Examiner's Office has ruled Stacy's death a homicide, Steve's death a suicide. We have a reporter talking to someone close with the couple right now. We'll bring that to you as soon as we can. In other news tonight, it's been 15 months and a man is still trying to find closure after coming upon a murder in progress while working as a City of Fargo garbage truck driver.
23-year-old Arthur Colley awaits sentencing for the brutal beating of 14-year-old Jupiter Paulson. Officials say Colley beat the teen for more than 30 minutes before he was stopped by that city worker. Valley News Team's crime and safety reporter Bailey Hurley shares his story of guilt, struggle, and his pursuit of justice for a girl he didn't know.
Patrick Peterson is still taking it day by day.
There's no getting over it.
The scene of the crime is no longer on Peterson's city garbage route, but he still goes every Friday morning, playing a guilt-filled, torturous game with himself.
I time myself on when I can get there, if I can get there earlier or not, and I typically do, which makes me just kind of wonder would it have made a difference, would it not?
It was Friday, June 4th, 2021, minutes before 7 a.m. when Peterson rolled up to Party City, as he did every Friday. But that day, he said he found Arthur Colley kneeling over 14-year-old Jupiter Paulson, with one hand on her throat, the other pinching her nose.
I still see the blood on the pavement.
Despite his best efforts, Peterson couldn't save the teen, a loss he says he's taken personally, as his daughter Callie would have been the same age as Jupiter, but she died of SIDS 15 years ago.
Everything resurfaced. That's a second kid I couldn't help. That rips you apart. It just destroys you.
He says his job will never be the same, as he's always looking for the next person he may need to help or try to save, adding he's not sure he'll ever find closure. But he says he knows he now has 2 angels who will be with him through it all until he does. Bailey Hurley, Valley News Live.
Peterson adds he feels like proper justice will never truly be served as Jupiter Paulson is no longer here, but he says he's hoping a judge will hand down a life sentence without parole to Arthur Colley. That court date has not yet been set.
Take a look at this. You're looking live at the Skyway Bridge that's been closed due to high winds as Hurricane Ian slams the Sunshine State. Let's send it over to Chief Meteorologist Hutch Johnson for details on where the storm is hitting right now. Hutch?
Oof, Stacy, I can't imagine the winds that they experience in those kind of storms as we head into the evening hours. It's continuing to be strong, although it's weakening a bit as it moves over land. I'll have much more on that momentarily. This morning, brutally cold here in the valley and some 20s out there as we forecast last night, low to mid 20s. That's exactly what happened. Oaks, the cold spot, 23. Amaretto, 25 degrees to start your day. Leonard, no picnic either at 27. We're 25 in Bemidji, Waskish at 28 degrees. Fargo, hey, we kind of stood on an island here. 36 degrees, so no freezing for us. Now, take a look at temperatures. 60s here in the valley, 50s in central Minnesota, nearly 80 in central North Dakota. Warmer weather's heading our way. This evening, we'll stay in the 50s. It will not be as cold here tonight. And we have a warming trend to talk about in a minute. Now an update on Ian. Here you can see the storm working its way onshore. It has worked right through the Fort Myers area. There is a lot of rain that's falling here on the north side of the storm with basically a lot of flood warnings there. Category 3 now, 125 mile per hour winds with gusts upwards of 180 miles per hour. So still very destructive, and it will be working its way across the peninsula as we go through the overnight hours. We'll have hour-by-hour details on your forecast, and we'll talk about how warm we get, and we do have a chance of rain. We'll detail that coming up here in just a couple of moments.
All right. Thanks so much, Hutch.
It's usually a safe bet that up north that the only extreme weather you have to worry about are blizzards and maybe some flooding. However, one former North Dakota resident has found himself in the crosshairs of the hurricane. Bruce Asbury, who now lives in Sarasota, Florida, that's just south of Tampa, described to us yesterday what he saw before the storm, as well as how he planned to navigate it in a town that's usually never hit by hurricanes.
130-mile-an-hour winds, they say. I learned to deal with high wind during all those years that I lived in North Dakota. It is a nightmare on the interstates out of town. So I just decided to stay home and watch my palm trees blow down on my house.
That was yesterday. As conditions changed today, so did Asbury's plans. He was no longer available for an interview today. He was preoccupied on evacuating, getting to safety from that storm.
In other news, police say a Dilworth man is facing criminal charges after starting a fire and vandalizing a restaurant where he used to work. Chad Peterson is facing first-degree property damage and second-degree arson charges after he broke into Boulder Tap House in Moorhead and tried to start a fire. Police say they were sent to the restaurant just before 8:30 yesterday morning.
They say that rocks had been used to break the windows at the brewery, and remnants of a fire and a pile of laundry and bags were used, and they were still smoldering. The manager said she thought Peterson, who's said to be a disgruntled former employee, did it. And he's making harassing and threatening calls to the restaurant, and at one point said he would burn the restaurant down. It's estimated that the damage could be $1,000. The man who's being charged for a January crash that tore apart a family, killing one, is pleading not guilty. 43-year-old Mario Butler is being charged with reckless endangerment, driving under suspension, and driving without liability insurance. He's accused of abandoning a flatbed tow truck on I-94 after it started having mechanical issues. The impact killed a wife and mother, as well as injuring her husband and 2 of her kids.
Fargo police have identified the man who died in downtown Fargo after being hit by a train around midnight last Friday. They say the victim is 35-year-old Matthew Caleb Scott, who's not from this area. Police say when they arrived on the scene near Cowboy Jack's, Scott was dead. There are no signs of foul play.
A new book says North Dakota's Attorney General Drew Wrigley suggested a last-ditch effort, which U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota forwarded to former President Donald Trump's chief of staff to challenge the 2020 election results.
The book, called The Breach, says Wrigley suggested that Trump demand statewide recount of absentee and mail-in ballots, and if state officials refuse the recount, the legislature would then act under the Constitution, selecting the slate of electors. Wrigley says he's baffled anyone would think he acted inappropriately by, quote, suggesting Trump's people follow the rule of law.
It's an exciting new advancement in orthopedic surgery. Essentia Health in Fargo is now using a robotic surgical assistant for certain procedures. The robot assists specially trained surgeons in carrying out extremely precise knee replacement procedures. It uses data it collects before and during surgery to tell the surgeons about details on the patient's unique anatomy that may play a role in the implant fit. This way, surgeons say they can plan for and carry out personalized surgeries. The doctors add anyone who is in need of knee surgery qualifies to have what they call ROSA in the operation.
We've been using it for a few months. So far everything's gone smoothly. I think patients like it, and we're just hoping that as it continues to grow, we just continue to see more and more positive results with it.
Dr. Lindemeyer also says anyone who is in need of knee surgery qualifies to have ROSA in the operation.
Later on Valley News Live at 6, a Grand Forks couple is suddenly worrying about much more than their wedding after their lives are flipped upside down.
And as the nation's eyes are on Hurricane Ian working its way across the peninsula, we have quiet weather here and warming weather after a frigid start to your day. Hour by hour details on how warm it gets coming up right after this.
This is Valley News Live.